What would you do if you were going about your business as usual, when out of nowhere you realized that all of the exits to the building that you were inside of had vanished? No warning, no big grand noise or flash of light, but in the stillness, no escape. Well, that's exactly what we will be discussing in today's story, which is entitled All the Doors and Windows in My University Building Have Disappeared. This was posted to the r/no sleep subreddit by Mr. Outlaw. Hello everyone, I'm CC with the Crucible of Character, and we will get right into today's story. Be sure to make sure to like and subscribe and comment if you enjoyed today's video. Without further ado, here we go. It's 10 p.m. We've been in this building for just over 12 hours. By now, we've searched the entire place about a dozen times over, checking every corner, every hallway, every room, coming to the same conclusion every time. On the third floor, we found a maintenance room with a ladder, presumably leading up to the roof. We broke through the hatch, and you know what we found? A bunch of wet dirt, as if the building had somehow become buried underground. The dirt was at least soft enough that if we were really inclined to, we might be able to crawl up through it, but we're not desperate enough for that yet. Not yet. We're sitting in the library now. We'd moved away from the cafeteria because the group digging into the wall was starting to freak us out. They were looking worse for wear every time they came back out. Faces dripping with sweat, the skin on their hands slowly tearing away. The cafeteria was running out of chairs. We tried convincing them to stop, told them they must have excavated hundreds of feet of drywall, and yet they were still going nowhere. But they wouldn't listen. They almost seemed possessed, deathly intent on the idea that eventually they'd make it out. I got a message from James telling me that there's still police surrounding every inch of the building, that they've expanded the perimeter so that no one can get a good look at it. The multiple SWAT teams have arrived, and he's heard sporadic gunshots ringing through the air. I don't want to say that we've given up, but we really don't know what to do. There's 4 of us here: Rachel, Jason, Amira, and myself. We didn't know Jason or Amira. We just happened to end up together. Most people have split off into smaller groups, though I've also seen a few sitting or standing by themselves. We've been talking a lot, trying to figure it out, to rationalize things. Amira thinks we've ended up in hell, that it explains why everyone else has disappeared. I told her that doesn't make any sense, because why us? Why a bunch of university students writing a philosophy exam? She looked at me, asked if I'd ever done anything terrible. I told her sure, but so is almost everybody else, so why were we singled out? She didn't respond to that. She then changed the topic, asked us what we'd seen on the second page of our exams. I thought about that strange-looking machine, about why it seemed so familiar, but I still couldn't place it. I guess it was some memory that had been buried too deep. Amira told us that the only thing on her paper had been a sketch of a man's face, middle-aged, disheveled hair, scars all across. She said that she'd seen that man before a long time ago. She'd been on a family vacation on a beach somewhere. It was nighttime and she'd snuck out of the hotel with her cousin. They were sitting on the sand in the dark, staring out at the ocean, when they saw a figure ahead, sitting waist deep in the water. Each wave that rolled onto the beach was heavy enough to completely submerge the guy. But this didn't seem to bother him. He just sat there. This entire time, they thought that he was facing towards the ocean. But then, the clouds cleared, and the moonlight revealed that he was actually looking straight at them, staring with eyes so wide he had to be forcing them open. She said that he stood up, and seconds later he was running towards them. Of course, they immediately began sprinting away, but by the time Amira got back to the hotel, her friend was no longer there. She told her parents and police were involved. Neither of them were ever found. Jason said that his paper contained only a phone number, 123-456-7890, the same number he'd gotten a call from the day that his former roommate had committed. He was in his old apartment, working on an assignment, when he saw the number pop up on his screen. Bored and curious, he picked it up. He said that the voice on the other end was robotic, genderless. It sounded automated, and the only thing it said was that his roommate, Kyle, was about to die. He thought it was some messed up prank until he heard a banging noise coming from Kyle's room. He rushed over there and swung open the door. Kyle was standing on a chair in the middle of the room with a noose around his neck. There was a little girl sitting on the windowsill behind them, wearing a large hat that covered her eyes and nose. Kyle grinned at him before suddenly kicking the chair away. Jason tried to save him, but wasn't able to. After Kyle went unconscious, the little girl laughed at him and then jumped out the window. They were on the 17th floor. Then he remembered that Kyle never had a window in his room. The police were never able to trace the call. It came back as a dead number. This entire time, Rachel hadn't said anything at all. The blood had drained from her skin. and she was staring down at the floor. We assured her that she didn't have to talk about it if she didn't want to. She took a deep breath and said that her exam had a Polaroid photo taped to it, a photo of herself in her childhood bedroom, taken from inside the closet. She said that she had a boyfriend in high school named Chris. One night, they were both sitting in her room, and for whatever reason, they began to argue. It turned ugly, and then Chris ran into her closet and shut the door. She thought that he was being immature and told him to come out, but he said nothing and just stayed in there. She then walked over and opened the door, but he wasn't there, and her closet was tiny. There was nowhere he could have been hiding. Then she heard a noise coming from above, coming from the ceiling. It sounded like somebody laughing, not Chris's voice, like an elderly woman. She closed the door and told her dad what happened. He called the police, and they searched the entire house, but they could neither find Chris nor the woman. Chris was never seen again. Then, they all looked at me. I told them that I had seen the diagram of some sort of machine, but that I genuinely couldn't remember what it was supposed to be. I'm not sure if they believed me, but none of them pressed me about it. Of course it freaked me out, because if those things had happened to them, then what had happened to me? What was my brain trying to erase? Amira suggested that we go back into the exam room, so I could take a look at it, jog my memory. I told her absolutely not, that I had no interest in finding out, but then Rachel said that she was pretty sure she'd left her phone charger in that room, so she was going to go over there anyways. We agreed to accompany her. When we got there, we found that somebody had turned the lights off. Problem was, we didn't know exactly where the lights were. Maybe somewhere on the rightmost wall. We walked inside, and I was about to turn on my phone flashlight when Rachel stopped me. She told us to be quiet, so we did. Then we could hear it. The sound of several pencils scribbling against paper. As our eyes adjusted to the dark, we could make out the silhouettes of several figures sitting down, hunched over the desks. We ran out of there and shut the door behind us, and then barricaded it with chairs. On our way back to the library, we passed by the hole in the wall and noticed that it had gone silent. It hadn't been silent for a while. Jason took this to mean that they'd finally tunneled their way back outside. They just hadn't bothered coming back to let us know. I wasn't so sure about that, but he'd already ran inside. We followed after him, doing our best to traverse through the crooked, uneven path. It was surprising just how long it stretched on for, but at some point the air started to become really cold and crisp, and then we could see daylight, gray and muted, but unmistakable against the darkness. Jason became ecstatic. He turned around with this huge smile on his face and said that we'd done it, that we were going to make it out. But something wasn't right about this, because there shouldn't have been daylight, because it was midnight. He began running faster, and we struggled to keep up. But soon the tunnel had reached its end. Soon we were outside, just not anywhere I recognized, not anywhere we should have been. Somehow we were now out in the ocean. Thick, dark gray clouds rolled across the sky above. Heavy thunder rumbled in the distance. Rain came down and then in a light drizzle. In front of us was what looked like a giant metal platform, like a vast, sprawling sewer grate hovering above the water. I was hesitant to step on it, but I tested it with my foot, and it seemed to be sturdy. We walked out onto it and looked around, though it was hard to describe what we saw. It was like a floating city, constructed entirely out of steel. The more I looked around, the more uncanny the architecture seemed. The buildings were two-pointed, almost sword-like. They were also built in a way that seemed haphazard, nonsensical. There were vast stretches of empty space, but also areas where several buildings converged into one, forming a grotesque-looking metallic behemoth of a structure. They almost looked like giant metal tumors. Some buildings were tall enough to pierce the clouds, while others were no larger than a shed. Some of them were unorthodox shapes. There was a pyramid, a sphere, a pentagon. Some buildings seemed to be hovering in the air without any visible support. There were lights on in some of the windows, though there didn't seem to be anybody around. The air smelled like raw fish, smoke, gasoline. There was a constant grating noise in the background, sounded like metal being sharpened. Every time lightning flashed above the clouds, we could see the outline of colossal figures in the sky. One of them looked like a human skull, another like a serpent with 1,000 tendrils. Jason's expression took a sharp turn from hopeful into unbridled anguish. He knelt down, buried his face in his hands. We tried to pull him up to his feet, but he wouldn't budge. Rachel pointed out somebody in the distance, standing on top of one of the buildings. We thought it could have been Arnold, because he was wearing the same red shirt. It looked like he was watching us. We debated whether or not we should try calling out to him, but we decided to stay silent. After a while, he walked off the edge, plummeting what looked like hundreds of feet down to the platform. The fall should have been high enough to turn his body into a pancake, but he landed perfectly on his feet, seeming no worse for wear. Then he got down on all fours and began began crawling towards us. It was a shocking enough visual that it kind of paralyzed us for a moment before we were able to regain our bearings. We turned, bolted back towards the tunnel, but we couldn't find Jason. We looked around until we saw him sitting on the rails at the edge of the platform. We called out to him, but he paid no attention to us. Then he jumped. Before he could even hit the water, a gigantic, pale hand shot up from the ocean, grabbed him, dragged him down. I looked at my feet. Through the openings in the platform, hovering just below the surface of the water, was what looked like a human face. It was probably about a dozen feet wide. The best way I can describe the expression on his face is that of enthusiastic malice, as if it just couldn't wait to hurt us. I looked back at Arnold, and now he was close enough for us to see that his head had been twisted all the way around. We ran back into the tunnel, crashing through the drywall until we made it back inside the building. We began barricading it with tables, chairs, whatever we could find, but nothing followed us back. We sat on the floor and caught our breaths. We're still sitting there. There's been little discussion about what we just saw. Seems like we're all at a loss for words. The end. Wow, that was an incredible story. It definitely twisted a few times. I thought for sure that when they got out of the tunnel that they would be outside. I wonder what that would look like from the outside. Would it be almost like an optical illusion, like they came through the exterior of the building, and it appeared as though when they looked backwards they could just see right back in the room? Or did it actually look like a tunnel that had come off of the building? I'm not entirely sure, but it's cool to kind of speculate about it. I think that the characters in the story definitely did the most with what they could. I think that, for the most part, they couldn't have done anything different or better. I think that with how much craziness and how much weird stuff had gone on, it's kind of hard to preempt. I understand that our IQ is kind of locked in when we turn about 7 years old. That's, to what I understand, that's about it. Because that's about the time when we start understanding things based on past experience. We start using past experience to get a grasp on new things, as opposed to just kind of tackling them at face value. It's at a point in time in which our pattern recognition kind of kicks in, as opposed to our ability to just tackle it as a completely new thing. That's why it kind of locks in, because that IQ is, again, this is to my understanding, I'm not a psychologist or anything that would understand this more, but to my understanding, the IQ score is kind of the ability to problem solve. And so people with a high IQ tend to be smarter because they have a really, really high ability to problem solve. People with a low IQ score come across as dumber because their problem solving skills are very poor. Now, in this story, the reason I brought that up is because there's really nothing that could have prepared them for this experience, really nothing. They couldn't have anticipated going in that room and seeing those people. They couldn't have anticipated having the random junk on their tests that was a reminder of the traumas in their past. They couldn't have anticipated having hundreds of feet of drywall that they had to sprint through to run from that creature. They couldn't have anticipated the skull in the clouds, or the random buildings, or this metal grate that was seemingly flying, or the big hand in the water. None of it. And so I think this type of story kind of leads into almost like Call of Cthulhu, like an existential dread of the unknown. Something that's so completely incomprehensible that you just kind of break. I really like how they kind of pointed that out when the creature jumped off of the building, about how they truly were just completely lost. And same thing with the very end. There is no real hope that can be drawn at the end of this story. If you were in this scenario, what hope would there be? You made it out and it's still purgatory, or what seems to be purgatory. I really like that. I really like the thought of that, of trying to understand that or grasp a incomprehensible thing. I think it's not often enough that we are able to have that opportunity to try and grasp something incomprehensible. But I think that when we realize that truly there are situations like this that we go through every day. There are things around us that truly are incomprehensible. There are things around us that give us trauma or pain or whatever else, and yet we are still able to make it through. I know that it's not to this degree, but I think that that's the lesson that we can apply from today's story, is that no matter what, there is always an option. No matter what, we do have experiences that we can draw upon for help. No matter what, if we stay together like they did in the story, hopefully it'll be okay. Hopefully you all got something similar, but if not, I would love to hear about it in the comments below. Make sure to comment your thoughts, questions, concerns, maybe tips and tricks for how I can make these videos better. Please let me know if you like the video. It definitely, I appreciate it so much. I love how much the video from a few days ago blew up. Almost 200 views on it already. And after doing this for 2 weeks, it's kind of like that first fleck of hope that this is really going to go somewhere. If you like it, these videos, that is, please make sure to subscribe, like, comment, everything. Any little bit helps me in the algorithm, and I really appreciate it. Alright, I'll talk to you later. This has been CC with the Quizzer Wolf character, and bye.